The annotation principles that we've looked at so far include annotating within the maximal projection of the target LU. We're also committed to annotating full constituents, that is, as I've illustrated a number of times, including the preposition that heads the prepositional phrase. So what do we mean when we say we annotate within the maximal projection of the target? Frame elements are realized locally by constituents that are part of the maximal phrase headed by the target word, with the exception of subjects, right? What in grammar we call the subject of a sentence, or maybe the subject of the subject of an event noun, right? Remember, FrameNet also annotates nouns, adjectives, etc. And from the perspective of the frame structure of an event noun, an event noun can evoke a frame. An event noun has dependents. An event noun allows the instantiation of the frame elements in the frame that it, to which it belongs. So subject is treated a little differently, and later on, probably tomorrow, we'll get to the criteria that FrameNet uses for annotating subjects, in particular when they're when we look at different kinds of control structures. But other than subjects, everything we annotate is within the maximal projection of a target. So why don't we look at the sentence, the in-frame sentence that we considered earlier? Notice the target LU retaliated, and the frame elements that we've annotated are all within the maximal projection of the target. In the olden days, we did everything with trees, especially syntax, and most of what semantics had to say was in the syntax. I'm not fond of trees, but I think this one is useful because it illustrates the point. Each constituent is a dependent of the target retaliate, and they're all parallel in terms of their relationship to the target, right? There isn't any higher level, lower level, what we used to talk about as deeper or less deep, okay? And I think an interesting way to convince yourself, if you're not convinced, that that's true, is to look at the following sentences, each of which only includes one of the dependents that are in the original sentence, right? I can say Vittoria retaliated against her boss. It's still a good example of retaliate in the revenge frame. There may be more null instantiations in each one of these sentences, but they all illustrate revenge, and they can stand alone. No one of these sentences actually needs another dependent with it to make the sentence a grammatical sentence, a meaningful sentence, and an appropriately used for this frame sentence. So you're convinced. As I have said from the start, we include the heads, the prepositional heads of prepositional phrases. We've annotated the entire constituent, not just the piece of the constituent that names the entity or event or action that fills the role. We annotate the entire constituent, so by virtue of adhering to that principle, of course, that includes the preposition. But if you think about why it matters to include the preposition, you'll have even greater appreciation for FrameNet adopting that practice. Sometimes the preposition that heads the prepositional phrase that is a dependent of the target LU can actually differentiate between two senses of a word. So here are a couple of examples. Complain in the sense of complaining about some medical problem comes with the preposition, a prepositional phrase, or typically comes with a prepositional phrase beginning with the preposition of. She complained of back pain. I can say she complained to the doctor about her back, right? That's okay, right? I can't say in the official act sense of complain, we complained of something to the mayor, right? Usually you complain to officials about things that you're not happy with in your town or in your community, right? I can say we complained to the mayor about something, just the way I can say she complained to the doctor about her back, and maybe just given the syntax of those sentences, those two, the two sentences that constitute a minimal pair, we would think, oh, this is the same LU because it has the same types of dependence, right? Two prepositional phrases, one headed by to and one headed by about. But we complained about the water to the mayor. I can't say we complained of water to the mayor. It's not possible. Okay? So prepositions are really, really important for a number of reasons, but also as a clue to sense discrimination. And that, in turn, is also important when it comes to thinking about what criteria, syntactic and semantic criteria, you're going to use to help you determine what words belong to the frame that you're considering. You've now heard me say numerous times that annotation is actually, frame element annotation is actually a triple of annotation information. We get the frame element, we get the grammatical function, and we get the phrase type. As a reminder, FrameNet has automatic processes that provide grammatical function and phrase type information, and the job of the annotator is to check that what the classifier has provided is correct for the sentence that they are annotating. If it's not, obviously they change it. FrameNet has a limited set of grammatical functions. As I hinted earlier, we treat subjects differently from other positions, shall we say, in a sentence. Right now, what's important to know is that we use the label external for subjects. And we use it because it's actually more general. It's a broader term than just subject. It allows us to deal with, for example, control subjects of control verbs, right? Later on, we'll talk about different kinds of control structures more generally. But for here, the important point is that we use the term, the name for the grammatical function, typically subjects, we use external. Trust me, this gets more complicated later as we start looking at lexical material that's not as straightforward as verbs appear to be. Another important piece of information about FrameNet grammatical functions is that we don't distinguish, as some syntactic theories do, between complement and adjunct. From our perspective, they are dependents. And certainly from the perspective of lexical analysis, lexicographic annotation, dependent is sufficient, right? We care about the other pieces, the other parts of the sentence that are dependent on the verb, the predicate. So dependent actually captures the situation. And although now is not the appropriate time to talk about the pros and cons of a theory that includes a distinction between complement and adjunct, it's sufficient for me to say that we don't believe that it really buys anything. Okay? I'm now going to give you a list of some of the phrase types that FrameNet uses. Again, when you look at when you go to the web page and you look at the lexical entry reports, and you see both the frame elements and their syntactic realizations table and the valence table, you'll also see that there are many more than are listed here, but I just wanted to give you a sense. Some of these also are relevant for the sentence that we are looking at, the one that in the revenge frame that we've been looking at. And then, of course, for those of you who are really interested in learning in depth about the phrase types that FrameNet uses and how it uses each phrase type, Chapter 4 of what we call the book gives a full set of phrase types and how we apply them. We also, of course, have phrase types for adjectives and adjective phrases and the whole gamut of possible phrase types, at least in English. Once again, I don't know any Portuguese, really, but I do know a little bit about Spanish simply because I had the opportunity to work with Carlos Subirats on a paper about Spanish FrameNet. So I do know that Spanish has some different phrase types than English. So I assume it's likely that Portuguese may have some different phrase types as well. And so in the development of FrameNet Brazil, you'll need to take into consideration what works, what's needed for Brazilian Portuguese, obviously. Okay, so now let's look at our sentence again, only this time with phrase type and, with grammatical function and phrase type indicated. We have adopted this way of illustrating the triple of information. It just seems to be what works. There are lots of ways that you could do it, and if you look at the FrameNet website, this isn't even the way it's done on the website, but it does seem to be an effective way for PowerPoint presentations. So we have Victoria, the Avenger, as external noun phrase. Against her boss is the constituent that instantiates the offender, and that's a dependent. Its grammatical function is that of dependent, and the phrase type is a prepositional phrase headed by the preposition against. Likewise, for the other frame elements, for being dismissed is the injury, dependent prepositional phrase headed by for, and lastly, by leaving with the office keys, that's the punishment, dependent, and a by prepositional phrase. So now, what I would like to do is give you those two other sentences to annotate here, and Tiago and I will walk around and see how you're doing and give you some help and some tips if you need them. And I hope at least that you'll ask questions so that I could clarify things for you and help you move forward in learning how to do this type of annotation. So our three sentences, our in-frame examples, are here. We've done the first one together, and I guess groups of 4 or 5 work, groups of 4 or 5 people. I'd like you to do the second 2 sentences, both number 2 and number 3. Frame element, grammatical function, and phrase type. I suggest starting with frame element first, and then worrying about grammatical function and phrase type. I think once you get the frame element sorted out, the others should come naturally. Okay, so let's spend, you have 2 sentences, I would say 15 minutes. Okay.